and I'm honored to be with everyone today. Sorry I can't be there in person. I'm gonna give you guys a peek behind the screen at BIG. I joined BIG 10 years ago. The office opened in 2005 and we opened our doors in New York City in 2010. I joined in 2012 and walked into a really talented, really rambunctious group of designers that were ready to change the world. So we're spirited and excited not only about the work we do, but about the fun that we have with each other. Our office in New York has moved around quite a bit. We started in Chelsea, moved to the financial district, and now our home is in Brooklyn. We also have offices in Copenhagen, in London, and we just opened up last year in Spain. So we're quickly expanding across the world, and it's really great for us to be as close as possible to the sites that we work on and the clients we work with. The scales of projects that we work on, it ranges from the scale of a light bulb to the scale of a 100-acre master plan. And I'm going to take you through a bunch of those projects today, but with a real focus on the type of work that I've been doing. In 2005, we only had a few built projects. This is the Mountain and 8 House in Copenhagen. You also see an exhibition that we had called Yes is More for our first monograph of our work. And the Danish Pavilion in Shanghai opened in 2010. In the 5 years that followed after I joined the office, you started to see our portfolio of built work was building up quite nicely. And as the years have gone on, we are exponentially growing in terms of our reach and the types of projects that we're working on. Today, we have 88 built projects around the world, and we currently have 44 buildings that are under construction. My first project that I led in the office was in 2014, when Bjarke decided it was time for the next Yes is More, and that became Hot to Cold. Hot to Cold, what we call an odyssey of architectural adaptation, is a journey through all of our projects arranged by climate, from the hottest places in the world to the coolest. This is a little behind the scenes peek at our process behind making the book. We sketched out every chapter. We spent many late nights going through every draft and sitting long hours with Bjarke to really make sure that all the stories were told right and all the projects came together into something that was truly unique. This is one of the mock-ups of the covers that we did early on in the process. And what we ended up doing was arranging about 60 of our projects and telling the story about performance and adaptation through these architectural masterpieces. And part of that journey was also about displaying the work in the National Building Museum. We're a team that really thinks outside the box. And when we first went to the museum, we were told that we were going to work inside this room, which is about 3 times the size of the room that I'm in now. It's a pretty small space. And what we really got excited about was actually the atrium. This is in Washington, DC, and a really historic building. So what we wanted to do was use that building as a framework for our projects. And we actually hung all of our models around the archways of the museum. So as you walked around, you really felt that journey from hot to cold of all of the projects. We unrolled the book and it was placed on all the ledges of the museum. And as you walked around, you learned about the projects and about how they were responsive to the environment. So that project and that journey, it always begins with research, and it always begins with looking at the world around us and thinking about how architecture can perform. A critique that we have about buildings is that they often look the same. Despite where they're located, they are basically these boxes that have all of these inefficient systems, and they're not built to do what they should be doing. So looking from France to Brazil, you see how modernism has brought to us many structures that look quite similar. What we're interested in is more vernacular architecture that's responsive to the environment it's built in, and you can really see the hand of the people that craft them. So our projects all look different because they're doing something to to really adapt to the site that they're placed in. This is West 57 in New York, a building that is a combination of a courtyard building and a tower. The Big U is a project we're working on that is social infrastructure, protecting lower Manhattan from sea level rise. And many other projects that become a framework for really the people that live within them. And this book was a journey through the narratives that took us through each of those projects, ending with a project that is really near and dear to our hearts, which is Amager Resource Center in Copenhagen. This project is a power plant. It's a power plant that turns the waste of the citizens of Copenhagen into electricity for 500,000 citizens. And unlike typical architecture, it's really a building that's monumental and a building that's social. We propose placing a ski slope and a rock climbing wall onto this building so that instead of just managing trash and turning that trash into energy, it was a building that the people of Copenhagen could really enjoy. That is a great example of us really breaking paradigms and really thinking about the future of living and what the future will be like. We love to partner with clients that are thinking outside the box, whether it's talking about transportation or living on Mars or the future of cities. And my focus has been over the past decade, has been on projects that really think about how we're going to be living in the next 50, even 100 years and pushing the envelope. We're always working closely with the clients, whether it's a corporate client who we're getting in the weeds with us to build with Lego blocks and brainstorm the programming, or it's a developer where we're showing dozens of iterations of what the project could be and having them put on AR goggles to take them inside of our work. Or a client like Oceanics, where the idea of building on the water and building a sustainable man-made ecosystem in the middle of the ocean is something that is not a moonshot, but something that's actually going to be happening. This project was presented at the UN about 2 years ago. You can see Bjarke there next to Mark Collins, one of the co-founders of Oceanics. We presented this and really unrolled this concept to the world. And my team for the past 6 months has been working on the first prototype. So these projects are real and they're really breaking boundaries, but they're things that are happening. From the ocean to the desert, I'm going to take you through 2 projects. I'm going to start with Oceanics and then we'll jump to Tolosa. Both of these projects, even though the sites are very different, they're dealing with the same types of systems, from energy, water, waste, food, to mobility and habitat regeneration. It's important for us to make sure that what we're doing is rehabilitating the environment and not destructive to it. Oceanics is directly responsive to the fact that by 2050, 90% of the world's largest cities will be exposed to rising seas. If you look in Miami or at the Venetian Causeway or its namesake city in Venice, cities are at risk and sea level rise is real and has to be addressed by coastal cities. Currently, there are tons of sustainable initiatives around the world, and that's where we start our work, looking at what's being done today that's really innovative and boundary breaking. In terms of solar, you can look to Germany to see towns that are completely powered by PVs on the rooftops. We look to clean water cities. We also look to flood-proof cities in Germany, where the public realm is elevated to accommodate flooding that will be happening in the city. And we even, our smallest project, we've been working on floating structures for over 5 years now. This is student housing in Denmark, where we're taking shipping containers and stacking 9 of them together to place on the waterfront. They're towed into position and allow people to live a really sustainable lifestyle right off of the port. Imagine waking up in the morning and just jumping into the river for a morning swim and then going off and having your day. Currently, these are under construction and it's being prefabricated on the dock and then pulled to its position in Copenhagen. So really exciting things are underway, but for oceanics, we wanted to think even bigger. And we wanted to work closely with the UN to make sure that we're embedding their 17 sustainable development goals into the city planning. So this is oceanics. It's composed of 36 platforms that form this, this city. The site could be anywhere, and it's to start, we learn from existing communities and how compact, reliant, self-reliant, and resilient they are. We also learn from nature how the leaves of a plant sway to collect water, how they harvest sunlight. And learning from those things, we've created different systems so that we use the sun to power the platform. We collect rainwater from the public realm and from the rooftop, and we recycle that water and use it throughout the platform. We grow as much of the food as possible inside the hull with aeroponic and aquaponic systems and communal farming throughout the platforms. And we also manage and reduce waste as much as possible through collection systems and treatment systems like anaerobic digesters. All of these systems are people first, where we're using our natural resources. Again, you can see here the diagrams evolving around the sun and the rain and the ocean and humidity to power and charge all of the facilities and the infrastructure that you need for people to exist separate from land. One pontoon is about 2.1 hectares. We designed it as a hexagon so that it would be stable and resilient, buoyant with the waters moving up and down, and also easily mobile and aggregated into different forms and different systems. These petals or skirts around the edges are allowing for access and protection and for food production along the edges. We are designing for low-rise buildings, currently around 5 levels. The heart of every platform would be communal farming. And the ground floor is activated with retail space and restaurants and maker spaces, while the living is placed on top. The buildings splay so that they can collect more rain and more sun. And we're looking at using all locally sourced renewable resources. So you'd feel this warmth throughout the development using wood, which is one of the most sustainable materials to be using. And all of these platforms are adaptable, and we imagine the use and the number of buildings and the design of the buildings would be responsive to the site that they're placed adjacent to. So here you see the hull, which is the platform of the building. If we start to look at what's inside that hull for all of these systems to work, you would see energy storage. You would also see water storage. The public realm collects the water, and the water is brought down into these systems underneath. The zero waste systems are all about having these exchange hubs where people share materials and goods. And lastly, the food production is also, with LED farming, something that can happen under the site. Together, all of these different systems create this sharing community where you have a really lively platform full of nature and community. The daylit vertical farming at the top of the pad is then complemented with the aeroponic farming that is within the hull. And then beneath that, we're even using the ocean and doing 3D ocean farming to grow oysters and mussels. And below that, we're using this technology called biorock that will allow us to grow these artificial reefs and rehabilitate the habitats within these water spaces that we are making our home. So one island is aggregated into 6, which forms a neighborhood or a cluster. And then those 6 neighborhoods are further aggregated to create a city for 10,000 people. This city would be complemented with different outposts that would allow for more energy generation, more food production. It's just all about supporting those systems so that people can live sustainably on the water. So here you see a quick animation showing the full city coming together. And you can really imagine that scaling. This is the city, looking at it next to Manhattan, which, Manhattan is almost 2 million residents. This city could scale up to become as large as Manhattan. Here you see an overview rendering. Imagine pulling up in a drone or an electric vehicle to the site and seeing all of these communities gathering by the waterfront. Here again, you see all electric mobility. Everything to and from the platform is sustainable as well. Here you see a productive edge where people can garden and grow food for the residents. From a terrace, you have a view of unbelievable view out, all waterfront views. And then underneath the platform, you have biorock and habitats growing in the water. This is one of the edges that would be really almost like the central park of oceanics. And we imagine markets at night really activating the space and it being a truly incredible place to live in any city that these are placed next to. So whether we're in Africa or in Indonesia or in East Asia or even in Denmark, these platforms would evolve with the needs of the local people and with the needs of the climate. So moving from water to the desert, another project that I've been working on that I thought would be interesting to share with you is with Mark Laurie. He is an entrepreneur who started diapers.com, jet.com, and a few other e-commerce platforms. Everything he touches turns to gold and has become a huge success. And his next great endeavor is to create a city from scratch. And he calls the city Tolosa, with the mission to create a more equitable and sustainable future for all. So before we were looking at, how do we build up cities on the water? But what Mark's really interested in is how do we look at land that's not being used for development and create really sustainable systems within the desert. So in the next 20 years, 40% of the United States is at risk of desertification. If you look at a map of the states, you see that 30% of North America is already comprised of semi-arid land. So we do have to come up with a blueprint for how we can envision a more sustainable future, even when the conditions are not exactly suitable for using water and collecting energy from the sun. All of these systems, we can provide the infrastructure from scratch to allow people to live there in a really resilient way. So here you see, I'm not going to go through all the goals, but it's just important to note that we work closely with consultants, water experts, mobility experts, and engineers to make sure that these goals can be tuned to be attainable based on the location that we're working within. The city of Tolosa is meant to combine the best of different worlds. So New York City, thinking about the diversity and the vibrancy, Tokyo, the innovation and the efficiency, and Stockholm in Denmark, looking at sustainability and governance. How do we bring all of those cities together to create a more equitable future where education is more accessible, the workforce is more prepared, and you can have diverse housing and buildings that are accessible to all. The current system, often as cities are growing, equality actually goes down and access goes down. Equitism is all about inclusive growth. So how can the growth of a city actually benefit all of the people that are living there? The answer to that question is Tolosa. And Tolosa is a prototype that starts with a blank slate, so it starts within a desert. We build a framework for success, which is the infrastructure, all of the systems that people need to live in the semi-arid landscape. The buildings are then built up, again, renewable materials, sustainable materials, making sure that we're building with as little waste as possible. And then as people inhabit these buildings and the city generates income from the ground leases, that money appreciates and is then channeled into the social services of the community. So things like the library, the makerspace, the retail spaces are all supported by the money that the city is making. This is just a very small piece. It's a 5-minute city of a much larger network. The goals of the city is to reach 5 million people, to be 150,000 acres large, and to have a density that's equivalent to San Francisco, but like even close to Paris, getting 3 times as dense as that. As urban planners, we needed to think about how we were going to facilitate this new economic model. And what we did is we looked at the efficiency of these structured networks and the more organic ecology that is adaptive. And we asked the question, how do we bring these two things together so that Tolosa becomes a framework for a really natural environment that's responsive to the flows of water, the direction of the wind, and oriented to maximize the sun. This is a plan of Tolosa. It's placed within a test site because we don't yet have a site for Tolosa, and the idea is that this blueprint could be implemented in many different locations. Here you see how we're working within the valley and taking all of the runoff and all of the channelized waterways and bringing it into the heart of the city to create a centralized green spine that would move through Tolosa and become the communal gathering spaces of the city. If you look right up at a zoom in of a 15-minute district, you start to see how all of these systems, the green being the park, the orange being the mass transit corridors, and the more beige and brown being the local transit and the micro-mobility corridors. They all weave together to create a site that completely transforms an empty desert into a sustainable city. So this is the final vision at 5 million people. You see that green spine weaving back and forth through the city. And if I were just to zoom into phase 1, which is the first phase for 50,000 residents, you'll see that it's composed of many different districts. Each district focuses on a different program. There's the Creative Village, which is all about the celebration of music. There's the Mobility Village, which is about how all the autonomous vehicles are created, made, and dispersed throughout the city. The Education Village, an area for governance, innovation, and sports. All of these districts, while they do have the main hubs of all these programs, it's also important to note that these programs are dispersed throughout the city. So when you're a resident living there, you always have access within 15 minutes of your home to these resources. Here you're looking at a view of the city from one of the mountainsides, and you see that all of the roofs have photovoltaic panels, again, to harvest that energy. Greenhouses are at the tops of all the buildings, and you have these green waterways that are moving between the site. You also have roads that are completely flexible. That means that both pedestrians and shared autonomous vehicles can share the same drive aisles. And we always get, quite excited about these ideas, and we want to really push at all scales how they can be developed. So we wanted to develop not just the roads and the urban infrastructure, but we wanted to develop what the mobility system would be. So we came up with an idea that we called ground to air, which is basically a pod that can be connected into a rotor or onto wheels or onto a SkyTrans system and can take users through the village, whether it's on the ground or in the air. The mobility hub is where all the autonomous vehicles cluster and refuel, or actually recharge, not refuel, because again, no fuel-based cars would be a part of the city. If you did have a fuel-based car and you were driving up to the city, you would park it at a perimeter parking lot. And then the minute you enter into the city, you are in an electric vehicle. This is showing the main spine or the park of Tolosa. The Equitism Tower is representative of all of the sustainable principles that I've been talking about. So it's a tower that's growing food, harvesting energy, storing water, and really representative of the mission of the city. This is showing one of the housing pods where you can see these really friendly green wood facades are very much a signature of Tolosa. The educational space is a university that Mark Laurie would also be hosting, and his plan is to attract all the best teachers and all the best resources into one location. He also wanted us to make sure that we were creating an area that was highlighting healthy, sustainable lifestyle. This is where the main stadium in the city would be. And around that main stadium would be all of these local recreational zones so that people who are not professional athletes still have access to really great resources in terms of athletics. This is the health center. Showing a clinic with personalized care and wellness centers embedded throughout. And this is a view from one of the terraces looking down to the city that would be active and lively both during the day and at night. So this, I believe I have one. Yeah, so this is from the water to the desert, a good quick overview of how sustainable principles can really drive urban development and how thinking outside of the box can really transform how we as designers and architects can start to change the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Alana. Thank you very much. I'm not sure if you can hear.
Yes, I can.
Yes, let me just intervene a second. I want to formally welcome you. I apologize at the beginning of there's some technical difficulties, but I wanted to say welcome again. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your presentation of the projects. Very, very interesting. They're especially interesting for us here at Domus. We have a program in urban vision and architectural design where we encourage a critical approach with the goal of promoting and allowing the formation of visionary projects. So your work and the work of Bjarke Ingels is an inspiration for our students. So thank you for the presentation. I hope you have some time, a little time with us to have a discussion session. And
Yes.
we also have some students here, and I'm sure they have some questions. I'd like to take the moment to introduce Tim Power. Tim Power is our program leader in the Urban Vision Architectural Design program, and he is with students today, and he's we'll jump in. Hello, Tim, and guide the discussion session and with you and the students. If we have time, we can also open up to the outside to some of our other students who are connecting with us online. Tim's here with us at school as our group of students. So thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. And thank you, Alana, for your fantastic presentation. I'm actually not going to be with the students today because I'm going to let them self-organize and ask questions independently. We've had a discussion group the last few days, sort of going over some of your projects, and they've got some projects that they're specifically interested in. Of course, the ones you've introduced, and a few topics they're interested in asking about. So, hi guys, I can see you're online. I don't see your microphone turned on, so I want to get started. So you guys just sort of take your turn. Whoever wants to go first. I'm going to suggest that maybe you sort of go back and forth between some questions about environmental concerns and some questions about community and social concerns, so we can sort of cover all the bases, okay? So whoever wants to get started, give it a go. Thank you. Thanks again, Alana.
Hi, good evening. I'm Snishta. Thank you for your lecture and for your time. It was a great opportunity for us to have you here, and it was really very inspiring. I wanted to talk about the upcoming vision of the oceanic city with this idea of floating city. Do you envision ocean to be our next land? And if so, what preventive measures should be taken to not make the same mistakes that we did with our land? Because of course, if humans are going to live in the ocean, there is going to be pollution. There's going to be harmful radiations that they take along with them, which are a threat to our wildlife now. So how do we make sure that we help the waterlife grow and not disturb them?
Thank you. And sorry, I didn't catch your name.
I'm Snishta.
So shit. Okay, thank you for that question. I think in some ways, yes, the ocean is the next land. What's really incredible about having the ability to build on the ocean is you're not working with outdated systems. You're completely starting from scratch. So some of the mistakes that we've made in the past, we can learn from them and build in sustainable systems that allow us to live in a different way. Once you sign up for Oceanics and you decide to be a resident and to be aboard this mission, you are going to be living in a different way. You're going to be using less water. You're going to be using less energy. It's not just about the systems that we're providing the community with. It's about them signing up to live in a more sustainable way.
Thank you.
And I also want to note that, I mean, we often talk about this as a blueprint for development. It's not just for development on the water as a floating system. These same strategies, as you can see with Tolosa, can be used on land. So the fact that it's floating, that's just some amazing engineering that we're going to be working on closely with Arup to make sure that the hull is efficient and buoyant and all the other qualities that I mentioned in the presentation. But again, all of these strategies could be applied to either a water-based floating construction or a land-based development.
All right, thank you so much.
I wanted to stop in for a second. When Alana answers your questions or when she responds, if you're not satisfied with the response or if you want more information, feel free to enter into a discussion. Okay, guys?
Yeah, yep.
Hi, my name is Vivi and I'm from Hong Kong. Thank you for your great presentation. These are really amazing projects that BIG has done. Actually, I would like to ask something like smaller than the previous project that you talked about. They're mostly like a city scale, and I want to look into more about housing. That I know BIG has done some housing projects in Copenhagen and other places in the world. As I'm from Hong Kong, like a city where space is very limited, and we also top the most on affordable housing city charts for many years. So for like housing and social housing, usually they are very basic and they are never well designed and they are without individuality. And BIG has created housing project that aims to provide housing for all. So what are the criteria to consider when designing social housing, and which has to be affordable but at the same time beautiful? What are the aspects to be compromised, and how does this business model work for BIG, and how does this work in other cities in the world other than Copenhagen or Denmark or New York? Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, something that we've seen in a lot of our housing projects is just because you're building smaller units, that doesn't mean they aren't as advantageous to live within. So when you're building a smaller footprint for each resident, you're already cutting the cost of the materials and all the spaces that are needed. So as a starting point, like, and living in Manhattan, we're used to living in small spaces. So it's kind of natural to us, but a lot of our affordable housing project, one is, it's called the Dong Residences, and it's built in Denmark. It's all wood construction, really simple, prefabricated, not a lot of bells and whistles, and it's affordable. Yet I think it's the type of space that has a lot of light and that anyone would be happy to live in. So I think as long as you're creating a good sense of community and bringing people together in the right way, creating small spaces, small efficient spaces is really the key to success with affordability.
Thank you. Also, do you think like this model can be adapted in other cities in the world instead of just like the socio-economic structure that Copenhagen or New York has?
I missed that first part you said.
Yeah, let's say I see a lot of like social housing that you build, and usually they work in like in Denmark, maybe in Copenhagen, but how about like other cities that maybe have different socio economic structure that maybe there's not as apparent in, so if you think it will also work in other cities in the world?
Yeah, I mean, affordable housing you see in nearly every city, like including Manhattan. A lot of it goes beyond the architects and the architecture, and is about how the government structures and how the zoning works in that city. But it's definitely something that is feasible beyond. We like to use Copenhagen as an example because a lot of our original networks were created there, so a lot of our projects are there. But in the next 5 to 10 years, you'll see that BIG's work is actually going to be as much global as you're seeing in Denmark. So these same principles can be applied to international cities, yes.
Thank you so much.
Hello. Let me see if you can see me. Oh,
Hello.
hi,
Carlos.
Alana. A pleasure. Well, my name is Carlos. Right. First of all, want to thank you for this amazing lecture. There's some truly amazing projects done both by you and BIG. First, I'm from Honduras, right? So my question goes around that area, right? It's directed towards sustainability and social projects. I think that actually making sustainable projects in Denmark or United States is in general terms a little bit easier, right? Than one in a country like mine, like Honduras, right? In which the economy is not stable or good and social problems have different intensity. If I invite you now, both you and BIG to Honduras with a low budget to do a sustainable project, how do you think the approach will be, taking into consideration, the materials and construction methods have to be vernacular?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were to invite us to Honduras, we would be thrilled to be a part of that because we're always looking to expand the different sites that we're researching. The first part of every project is doing work sessions and charrettes with local suppliers, contractors, and community to get to know for each different community what is best. And it's hard for me to talk without knowing Honduras in and out, as well as you do. But I think what's important to understand in having an architect like BIG on your side is that we will gather the experts in all of these different industries with all of these different knowledge bases to make sure that we're doing the right thing. So our iterative process, when we're designing, we always show the client dozens of options, dozens of details, and then we narrow it down to the best one. So if we start not knowing your site or your community, we might not hit it right on the nail the first time, but in talking to you and in talking to who you say are the experts in your world, we can work towards creating a more affordable and efficient model.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'll take your invitation, so follow up with me.
I'll say it to Tim so we can follow through.
So hi, I'm Marian. Thank you very much for your presentation, Alana. It was very inspirational. So my question for you regards the idea of adaptive reuse. So as you may know, construction makes up to 40% of carbon emissions today. So are any of your future projects involved in the idea of readapting existing structures? Or do you find that there's many more opportunities when you approach buildings or spaces from scratch? And if so, why?
No, I think adaptive reuse is the most sustainable way to build because you're starting, you're not bringing as much material and energy to the process. Like when you're starting on the ocean or in the desert where there is nothing, that's not an option to work with. But we are working on some projects where the one I'm thinking of is confidential, so I'm going to talk about it a little bit in the abstract, but we're working on an existing power plant that's been decommissioned for the past 60 years, and we're converting it into an innovation hub for sustainability and for research on climate change. So we're really working within the bones of a building that's over 100 years old and doing really light touches, placing in areas that would be well insulated and sustainable into a building that is not well insulated and that is not naturally sustainable. So we're actually able to plug in some of these sustainable practices and principles into a building that's, to be frank, is not, to create these like layered approaches that allow us to kind of inject sustainability into something that wasn't built with that in mind.
Very much. I'm Saloni. I'm from a visual design background. So thank you for taking us through a bunch of your projects and taking out the time to interact with us this evening. So BIG seems to focus a lot on the visual representation and the diagrammatic methodology to convey the design and the design concepts, right? The diagrams are admired and understandable by all, be it a client, a layman, or a fellow architect. So why do you think following such an approach is important for the BIG group? Does it help in bringing people closer to the built environment itself? And do you feel a similar sense of openness and generosity flowing into your projects?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that narrative approach and that almost simplification of the projects to present them to a larger audience is what originally drew me to BIG. I think often architects can be really theoretical and talk in terms that most people don't really connect with or understand. And therefore the audience to like understand and digest those building designs is much smaller. What BIG has been able to do incredibly well is to create almost like a recipe for storytelling. And I'm sure you guys have seen on our website and through studying our work that there is a very simple methodology to telling the story behind each building that builds it up from nothing to a form that is then affected by a change that is performative. All of those steps are so key to not just the final representation and the storytelling, but for us to make sure that we're doing these checks throughout the process, that everything that's being done to the building, every move is for a reason. And if you don't have a justification for that move, then you shouldn't be doing it. So I think even as a student, it's good for you guys when you're doing your work to just maybe like take a step back, diagram out what the story behind the project is or what the reason for all those different design moves are, and to make sure that you always have like a very clear ambition and a reason for doing each thing. And I think the second part of your question was about like, does that openness translate into the office? Was that?
Translate into like projects, like when people are actually living in the buildings and they're experiencing. So do you think the same openness translates into that?
Yeah, definitely. I think when people can better understand the space that they're in, it's huge. It helps, it basically, it improves their lives by allowing them to make use of all the elements that are designed for them. And a lot of our buildings, as I presented earlier on, are taking buildings that aren't typically social or used by people, like a waste to energy power plant, and then making it approachable and inviting. And that's a pretty hard task to do. And it's one that I feel like we are always down for a challenge. And, you know, you give us a power plant, we're going to put a ski slope on it. Like that's a pretty unusual hybrid. And it's about finding those unusual hybrids to create really inviting, innovative buildings.
So do you think the visual representation plays a part in bringing people closer, or is it that people actually need to go and experience the environment itself?
When you say visual representation, are you talking about the renderings?
Yeah, yes, the visual and the diagrams.
So typically, like we use renderings before the building is built. And I think something we pride ourselves on is you can often take a render and then you look at the reality of the built work and you sometimes can't even tell the difference because they're so close. That's when we know we've like effectively produced the visual and done a great job. For some of my projects, I've created these decks called Render to Reality, where we show all of the renderings that we've presented to unroll the concept, and then we show all the shots after the project is built. And yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge difference when you're able to represent your vision. So yes, always a benefit to do that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
While our students are getting into place, I just would like to remind them to speak into the microphone, which is straight ahead of you. Alana, if you see our students looking off to the left, because there's a screen off to the left where you are visually, so that's why they're looking that way, but the microphone is really in front of them.
Okay, so hi Alana, thank you so much. Can you listen to me, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, one of the biggest challenges when we talk about architecture and design processes is the generational change and the hemispherical shift that we have, because it brings with it change in mentality, learning how to use new tools, and the total abandonment of archaic forms and processes, you know, well, above other things. So with this in mind, it could be said that us, like younger generations, are more aware of the general problems of the world. So economical, political, environmental issues, among other things. So, well, for example, I come from a Latin American country as Colombia, and being born there brings with it different implications in terms of culture, different social issues, and different perspectives. So if you can say that. So my question for you is, first of all, if you are aware of the power and overall like the responsibility you as an individual or like a firm have when you are making decisions in the realization of a project. Like, I mean, I think any decision, no matter how little it may seem, will positively or negatively affect millions of people. So how do you see the responsibility and your like privileged position to set precedents for us, for the new generations, and how you use that new power to integrate the thoughts and our knowledge basically into your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're definitely aware of that. With the publicity that our projects get and the global reach, we understand the impact that our designs can have. And something that we've been working really hard in the office to do is to make sure that we have a diverse set of voices that are working on the project teams to make sure that those issues that the younger generations understand better than the older ones and the older ones understand better than the younger ones, all of those different voices, ages, types of people should be in the room. Something that I work in a Danish office and I'm American. I am surrounded by international people every day. I'm actually, I think, one of the only people in the New York office that was born in New York City. So I bring a very specific perspective from a very specific bubble, but I'm surrounded by people that all have different roots and different perspectives to bring to the table. So when we're sitting in a room right now, I'm working on the first prototype of Oceanics, which will be in the North Port of Busan in South Korea. That project team has a designer from Africa, a designer from Korea, a Mexican designer, an Israeli designer, and a Spanish designer. So that is just one project team where we are all from different locations around the world. And we have people on the team that range in ages from 23 to 65. So just bringing those perspectives into the room to sit at the design table and to sketch together is huge. And then when it comes to the representation to the world, we are really actively trying to make sure that we are representing diverse people throughout our images. I know coming from Copenhagen, I don't know if you guys have visited Copenhagen, but it's very white and it's very like across the board, not the most diverse example. So in our earlier work, I think you see a lot of the same types of people using the space, but in our later work, you're definitely seeing a more diverse user group being brought into the mix, which is great.
Yeah, well, thank you so much.
Thanks for the question. Sorry, that was long-winded. You guys can stop me.
Those are all really good answers, Alana, or good discussions to have, because this younger generation is definitely privileged in many ways, but also sort of walking into a room where there's all sorts of problems which they're very aware of at a very young age. So a lot of the discussions we have on your projects and projects of architects in general, yes, it's great, we love it, we're interested and we want to learn, we would love to work for these people, but at the same time, we're coming from a background and a physical location and societal issues which they all feel responsible for, and they want to bring back to their own countries. So, I really appreciate the questions that these guys come up with, and the answers that or the discussions that you're having with them. Anybody else there in the discussion group have any questions they want to add? I'm sure Alana does have to get back to work, but I'm sure she's happy to go over a few more discussions or a few more questions.
While the students are thinking about that, let me just interject here for a second, and because we have the students in front of us, and the orientation of the work of BIG, which is visionary, and certainly there's a component of conceptual, theoretical, while projects are being developed. How do you manage that? What's the relationship between that investigation, the exploration that happens through theoretical and conceptual, and that of the built work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, my work, as you can see, it's definitely weighted in the more visionary kind of department of the office, really thinking about things that haven't ever been done before. That is not to say we don't have projects in the office that are a bit more mainstream and buildings in cities done by developers, and that is a piece of our work as well. But no matter what the brief, a challenge for us is to always make sure that some part of the project is unique and different. Otherwise, like, why are we doing it? Like, we want to make sure that people are going to be using these spaces, inhabiting these buildings, and feeling almost a sense of awe, whether it is a low-income housing project in Manhattan or a cultural museum in Prague. Like, we want to make sure we're always embedding those same values. And I think to just talk about like the visioning work, even though the projects, when you look at them, like the floating city, you may look and be like, that's never going to happen. Like, why? Like, too much money, too much this, too much that. We are actually now creating, and I wish I could show it to you guys, we're presenting to the United Nations next week the first prototype for 3 floating platforms that will be built in Korea. So the projects, they may seem like they're just like out of the imagination and never going to happen, but we always have one foot, sturdy on the ground, and we're making sure that our proposals are real and can be built, even if it's visioning work, even if we're starting with a really big, 10,000, 5 million person city. At least a piece of it should be implemented in the near term, and that should be very feasible and possible with all the technology that exists today.
Okay, thank you very much.
A lot of your work is focused on some of these closed, interconnected systems, ecological systems, which is something that you're obviously embedded within both the desert project and the ocean project. One of the things is we find interesting, we've been talking about, is you're also sort of challenging new economic systems or political systems, perhaps, of what your client, especially in the Tolosa, what sort of new political and economic structure will need or want to be surrounding all the foundations for those projects. And I think that's something, I know that your office is also involved with business ventures for social housing or for new housing models. So how do you work with clients as far as this connectivity between economic and political structures and architectural systems?
Yeah, I think it's important. It's not always our direct relationship that's creating those connections, but it's important for us to encourage the client to work closely with the government on any of these projects that are doing things that are very different. So for example, in the Oceanics project, we're working with the government of Korea, and we're having actually design check-ins with them, where we show them progress on the planning and on the system so that they can write the policy. Some of these things like building on water, that's never been done before. So they actually have to reinvent the wheel and start thinking about how will governance on a floating platform work? And the answer for them is it will be exactly the same. It will be an extension of Busan, the city that is there. And all of the principles and the rules will apply. And they're going to actually write a code for building on the water that in the future can be used by other developments that will be using this, this technology and these interconnected systems. So it's really exciting work because it's, you know, it's stuff that we don't have a model for. We can't point to another example where this has happened, but we're kind of helping the client partner closely with entities that are necessary to make this feasible.
Okay, thank you. Guys, do you have any more questions related to these topics or something unrelated? Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Danush. I am from Interaction Design. I have a question relating to interactions in general, like based on what you were saying about, you know, a lot of your projects are visionary. I'm guessing the timelines of the implementations and by the time they become reality is also much ahead in the future. So a lot of interactions are changing every day. Like, you know, today the hype is about metaverse and things like that. And there's this entire hype about digital twins for cities and whatnot. My question is relating to this as to how do you envision the interactions that humans and your residents in these cities will have with the different types of tools and technologies, because things can change. Probably there won't be cycles, there will be something else for transportation, God knows. I mean, a lot of life verticals would change in the next timeline of when these two major projects that you showed will be implemented. So how do you envision that and how do you put that into your project so that by the time it becomes real, it is something that's functional and relevant for that generation altogether?
That's a great question, because, you know, how can we predict in 10 years, like how these interactions will exactly be? Like we can project into the future, and we often do that. But in general, as architects and as urban planners, we think about our work as a framework for interaction. The interaction is happening within it, and that interaction can change and evolve, but the framework should still be sturdy and reliable, and it should work no matter how the needs of the people are evolving. So adaptability, modularity, creating systems where maybe they're built a certain way for the first few years, and then you have that module that you can advance and change as the interactions are changing around them.
It's great to hear the idea and the vision behind your work and the context, how you're doing it, whether it's in the interdisciplinary context of the office of the firm, in which there's something which is very much related to what we do at school and what we encourage through our workshops. So that's wonderful for us, wonderful for the students to hear that this is something that actually does happen, and it's implemented, and this is the work that's coming out of it. So that was a great thing for us and our students to hear. And thank you again, very interesting work, and we will continue to follow your work.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Tim. It was nice to meet you all.